You're listening to Fox City's Murder and Mayhem, your bi-weekly dose of true crime history in a small rural community of Wisconsin.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Fox City's Murder and Mayhem. I'm Eric.
I'm Gavin.
Gavin, we are back again.
We are.
After a slight delay we had a laptop destruction last week, so.
Yeah. Listeners shouldn't notice any difference, but we had a laptop issue, and then I was on vacation. So these notes were written a little while ago. I don't remember what's in them. We'll see how this goes.
I'm not even sure what the story is about.
What are we doing today? I don't remember. No, I know what it is.
Are we doing the Shawano episode? Or did that get bumped again?
No, this is a Shawano County episode.
With a weird law?
With a weird law.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe people will be like, that's not a weird law, but I think it is. So deal with it.
Well, let's get into the story to find out if it is a weird law or if Gavin is just crazy.
Okay. So we're going to talk about the Stockbridge or Stockbridge-Munsee Native American group.
Okay.
There's going to be a lot of history in this episode. So
these are Gavin's kind of episodes.
Yeah, so if people don't like the history episodes, sorry, strap in because you're going to get it.
If I remember correctly, haven't we done Stockbridge-Munsee episodes before too?
We probably have. In fact, I'm pretty sure we did.
I think it was one where a kid was supposedly kidnapped by the tribe.
That is not a Stockbridge story.
Oh, that wasn't the Stockbridge story?
No.
Okay, I know there was a Stockbridge story.
There very well could be.
But anyways, take her away.
Okay, so the Stockbridge, for people who are not aware, got pushed around a lot from Massachusetts to New York to Indiana. They got Kaukauna. They got pushed over to the east side of Lake Winnebago. Finally up to a little place called Red Springs, which is near Shawano. They settled there. They were supposed to be given individual lots of land, but then the Civil War broke out, and the government just didn't have time. And they're like, we'll get to that later. So they set up their own little area without that sort of being determined at the moment. And it worked out fine for a bit.
For a bit.
Yeah.
That's the... Like all of these Native American stories go, it works for a bit until the white man decides that it doesn't work anymore. Right?
Yeah. So the focus of our story today is a man named Dan Tousey. And I'm just going to call him Dan through the episode. So Dan was born August 9th, 1881, probably on the Stockbridge Reservation. His Stockbridge heritage dates back generations, and he was related to other notable families with strong political backgrounds in the Stockbridge family. So that all looks good on paper.
Mm-hmm.
He was raised in Red Springs, which was the designated area. 1893, 1894, a man named Charles Painter, also known as Professor Painter, volunteered to take a census at no charge.
What a guy.
He proceeded to travel to Wisconsin, Canada, and New York in search of all the Mohicans and Stockbridge and everyone who deserved to be on the Stockbridge tribal rolls. For 6 months, he worked hard to make sense of the genealogy of the Stockbridge and Munsee Indians. He had as his assistant a man named John Adams, who, despite the name John Adams, is actually a Stockbridge member. They went through, they figured out that the marriages, births, deaths, people getting adopted. It was just a mess.
Mm-hmm.
The professor called what he saw the bitter factional strifes of 23 years and fearfully mixed marriages and great liberties of divorce. So this is what happens when you're pushed from one place to another, people are being born, people are dying, people are marrying, and to try to figure out who's actually Stockbridge and who's not becomes a real struggle.
Okay.
Because they're picking up people along the way. They're losing people along the way. They're marrying people who aren't Stockbridge. And then are the children Stockbridge? Or are they whatever the spouse is? And, there's a lot of these questions that, like, generally speaking, like, for the rest of us, these questions don't matter, right? If you're born here and your father is German and your mother is Irish, it doesn't make any difference.
You're just American.
You're just American.
Yeah.
But the way that all the native stuff is set up is so complicated, it's just a mess. The leaders of what were called the Indian Party refused to participate in the census. They said that the census was the most unjust, outrageous, and unconstitutional legislation ever passed by Congress in regard to their internal matters of the tribe. In numerous letters to the Secretary of the Interior, they protested the census, calling it an illegal enrollment of unauthorized persons and their descendants. The Indian Party, so the Stockbridge were really great about having these political parties that are very strong. Their title gives away what they are.
Okay.
Here, like, the rivals are the Indian Party and the Citizen Party. The Indian Party is very firmly like, we're Indians.
Mm-hmm.
And the Citizen Party is like, this is such a pain in the butt. Why don't we just agree to be Americans and accept some payments and just go on with our lives?
Mm-hmm.
So the Indian Party doesn't like this census because now the government is saying who is and isn't Indian.
I'm hoping that they're actually, like, doing the proper research and actually reporting that the actual people that are Native Americans.
They are trying. They are trying their best. But the Indian Party, one of their main objections is that somewhere along the way, the Stockbridge started intermarrying with black people.
Okay.
And the census headquarters was set up at the home of a man named Simeon Gardner, who they called a notorious Negro bigamist and profligate. I don't even know what the word profligate means, but it sounds bad.
Yeah, it does.
They said that the census was done out of this private residence rather than any government office. And whatever the case may be, the fact that this guy, this Gardner, who Gardner is very much a Stockbridge name, they don't consider him part of the Stockbridge because he's at least partially black. So they're like, no. So just the fact that he's involved makes this whole thing not right to them. The census went through and divided them people up into the Indian Party, the Citizens Party, the New York Muncies. The Muncies are slightly different than the Stockbridge, but they're basically in the same group now.
Mm-hmm.
A group called Outsiders, which I don't know what that means exactly, and the Tousey family.
So this entire family got their own classification?
Yeah, the Tousey family was considered so special. They weren't in any other group. They just get their own thing. Here we get to the weird law. In 1897, Congress passed a statute prohibiting alcohol manufacture and sale throughout Indian country, that is, anywhere on federal lands that are recognized as reservations or designated for Indian.
Okay.
They enforced this aggressively. Each year, local agents and superintendents were required to file reports specifying the actions taken to stamp out liquor sale and use on the reservations. This change in federal Indian policy coincided with the emergence of Morgan Siding as a center of alcohol sales and consumption. Now, Morgan Siding, first of all, is a terrible name, but it's a place in Shawano County. That's a city or a town or whatever. It's Morgan Siding. Terrible name. But
Okay, did you find any reason why they outlawed the sale of alcohol on Indian reservations? Because I just, like, what was the purpose behind this?
So this is the thing. I am fairly confident that Congress had good intentions.
Okay.
I don't think they were like, oh, we're going to deny, you guys the right that we give other people. I don't think that's the motivation here, surprisingly. The there had been a long history already at this point of white people coming in and giving alcohol to the natives and then treating them even more unfairly than they already treat them. This goes back to like the fur trade era where they would get the guys drunk and then they would make really bad deals with them.
Right.
So my assumption here, without looking into like the congressional debates and stuff, is that this was probably done, they thought, to protect them. I look at it and I'm like, this to me seems like you're telling some people they can do something and some people they can't. And that has some real problems. And the fact that this group is, in some, I don't know where the sovereignty debate is at this point in history, but the fact that they're basically considered their own group, but you're still making rules for them.
Yeah.
The whole thing is weird to me. What this did is this created this thing where this town called Morgan Siding, which is right outside of like Red Springs, is now the place where you go. If you're native and you want to get rip-roaring drunk,
okay, you'll go to this
you go to Morgan Siding. You can't do it in Red Springs anymore, but you just go 5 miles over and you're good to go.
Okay.
In Morgan Siding was our friend Dan Tousey. Now, he figured out that because he was in the census as the Tousey family and not in the census as a citizen party or the Indian party or one of the other groups, he wasn't subject to those laws. He could buy, sell, do whatever he wanted with the alcohol as long as he stayed off the reservation.
Okay.
Because his native status was special. He was his own group. So
all the other native groups get alcohol prohibited.
Yes.
But this guy's group, they're like, oh yeah, you can have it.
Yes.
Was this like some really rich family for some reason?
No.
So we have no idea why they got this special treatment?
I know why they got the special treatment.
Okay, we're coming to that?
We'll get there.
Okay.
July 1913, there was a dance at Dan Tousey's place at Morgan Siding. Some guys named Jim Reed and Jones House got their hats exchanged. And in trying to straighten out whose hat was whose, a fight broke out. Dan told them to stop fighting. He pushed Reed outside the door, but then the other man went outside, and Reed promised not to have any further words with House. But a young Stockbridge man named Thomas Hammer said, "No, I think we need a fight." And he encouraged them to go back to fighting. But Reed, one of the men, did not want to fight, and he went upstairs and went back to dancing. Hammer, the man who started trying to get them back riled up, went upstairs, and he went to Reed, who had refused to fight, and knocked him down. He's like, "I'm getting a fight." While doing this, Dan came up the stairs with an axe handle and hit Hammer across the head. As soon as this was done, Hammer's relatives then jumped into the fight. His father Rufus and his brother Job tried to take the axe handle away from Dan. Several more people jumped into the fight, and yet another man named Albert Fowler tried to take Rufus and Job Hammer off of Dan. Like, get off of him, stop beating him up. At that point, Tom Hammer stepped up from behind and stabbed Fowler with a knife 4 times. Fowler turned around, knocked Hammer down, leading to Fowler being stabbed 2 more times.
Wow. So we're up to 6 stabs now? Okay.
A doctor was ordered to come by, but the doctor was not quick to get there because this is very late at night. It's a dance. And Fowler does die at the Shannon Hospital. What's interesting about this is that Fowler, the man who died, was not at any point, later on he was trying to break up the fight, but he wasn't actively involved in the fight at any point.
Mm-hmm.
And he also wasn't drinking. He wasn't drinking at all. So this was kind of a tragedy in that the one guy who shouldn't have gotten his ass kicked dies.
Yep. But that's how these fights work.
Yeah. Hammer was arrested and placed in the county jail. A coroner's inquest was held. And the news said there's been a number of fights at Morgan Siding, and the place doesn't have a very good reputation. The district attorney said, we're going to punish Hammer, but we should also look into why these things happen. He said, if there weren't any taverns in Morgan Siding, this probably wouldn't happen. This is not, strictly speaking, Dan's fault, but it does happen around him. A couple of years later, August 1915, Dan himself is indicted for reckless homicide for the accidental shooting of a German immigrant named Reinhold Sidlitz. Dan and a friend were target shooting at empty beer bottles outside of his tavern. When the German immigrant woke up, he was drunk and sleeping it off behind the woodpile.
No way.
And as he lifted up his head to see what was going on, he got shot by a stray bullet.
Oh, wow. Not funny.
He was shot right in the head, and he died. Dan was charged with reckless homicide, but he hired a very good attorney, and the judge dismissed the indictment, and Dan went free. They declared it was just an accident.
I didn't think that even if it was just an accident, that was still okay.
Yeah.
You know?
By this point, 1915, Dan Tousey is a regular subject of complaint from the Indian agent to the U.S. attorney. Again, for people, we haven't done a native episode in a while. Indian agent is like the guy who lives on or near the reservation. He's like the government agent who kind of keeps track for the federal government of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So he doesn't like Dan very much, and he consistently files complaints. He spends about 20 years trying to put Dan in jail and can't do it. The liquor laws regulating American Indians were strengthened in 1916 when the Supreme Court interpreted the law to cover Indians who were otherwise not subject to the laws and were not on the reservation. So this would now, in theory, cover Dan as well.
So basically now at this point, any Native American can't have anything to do with alcohol.
Right.
Basically.
You were a special class, doesn't matter anymore. You moved off the reservation, doesn't matter anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Which, this to me seems even more like, this makes the law worse.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, the reservation is considered, like, federal land. So, like, the federal law says you can't do that. I don't agree with it, but I understand it. Now when they're like, if you're Native and you go anywhere in the country, you can't have a drink. Like, that seems to me like, okay, you're really pushing it now, but...
Well, and when you were talking about it before, this now sounds like, now you're really taking away a right from a person based on their ethnicity, whatever that word is, their ethnic background.
Yeah.
You know, unlike before, it was kind of like, because they could still drink, they just couldn't drink on the reservations.
Yes.
And now it's like, okay, now you're just stripping them of their rights.
Yeah. Oh, this didn't stop Dan. He kept his tavern going, and even once Prohibition started, he continued to have his tavern going, because although the federal government didn't like it very much, the Shawano County government really didn't care. Just do whatever you want, Dan. We don't care. August 3rd, 1921, now Prohibition's in effect. An Oneida man named George Showman came to Morgan Siding from Crandon, where he had been working as a painter. He was supposed to work for Dan Tousey, but before he got started his first day at work, He bought some canned goods at the Morgan Siding store and went to the home of his friend Charlie Brown. And yes, his name is Charlie Brown. He told Brown about some trouble that he had and really bothered him. And he left the impression with Brown that the trouble was gone now. He just had to get it off his chest. But when Brown got up to go out from the house, he said, "Well, goodbye. I'll see you later." And George Shulman replied, "When you see me again, it will be all over for me." Brown went a few feet from the house when he heard the shot of a .44 revolver and rushed back to the house and saw the body in a pool of blood. The entire upper part of his head was blown off, and death was instant. Dan Tousey was called in, even though he wasn't anywhere around, because this was supposed to be his employee, but they couldn't find any reason to connect him to whatever trouble this guy had.
Okay.
All through the 1920s, the reports coming back from the reservation called Dan things such as the worst offender against law and decency, and that his place in Morgan Siding is noted as the most iniquitous little community in the whole country. And while the Stockbridge mixed blood Tousey was the worst, other white men also ran speakeasies, some of whom are quite prominent in local politics. So they're complaining all around. They're like, we not only can we stop the natives from drinking, but now that it's prohibition, like, we still can't because the local politicians don't care. 1924, the agent sent a special police agent from Duluth to raid Dan Tousey's speakeasy. They couldn't get anybody local, so they had to get someone from Minnesota to do it. Tousey in this report is now described as a mixed blood Stockbridge and Negro. And this is the first time that I was found where he was referred to in this way. But this is how he gets the special class in the census.
Okay.
Because the members of the Stockbridge don't see him as Stockbridge. They see him as black.
Okay.
But it's funny because up to this point, I nowhere see this mentioned. And
what era are we in right now?
1924.
Okay. I feel like would the natives have been treated worse at that point in time, or would the African Americans be treated worse at that point in time?
That's a great question. That is a great question. I don't know. And it's strange to me that they like reject him for that. Like, again, like I wanted to verify, like, not that I doubt this, but I wanted to verify it. And I looked at it, and all I could find were names that were very obviously Stockbridge names.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see anything that was really obviously, a black name.
Okay.
So I'm not saying that's not true. I'm sure it's true. But to me, just looking at him on paper, I'm like, on paper, you sound Stockbridge. Like, I don't know. But anyway, the Minnesota agent comes in, raids him. Not surprisingly, he's got alcohol there. He pleads guilty, pays a $100 fine. The agent says that Tousey's liquor selling makes him guilty under God's law of murder.
Wow.
And complained that the fine given doubtless was made back in a couple days of good business. Basically, $100 is nothing to this guy.
Mm-hmm.
The next year, 1925, the agent complained, on a good Saturday night, enough can be made to pay the amount of any fines imposed. Tousey's Tavern was where women and men congregate, and the most vicious and obscene practices are indulged in. The agent posted a notice at the local sawmill. Any man found in Morgan Siding under any pretense whatever will be discharged from service at the mill. By 1926, there's some feelings that the superintendent, the agent in charge, feels like he's not winning this battle anymore. He made his observations about the Stockbridge and found situations as to law and order much worse on the Stockbridge Reservation near Morgan Siding. He said, the Oneidas, on the other hand, are very much superior to the Stockbridge, and especially the larger portion of the Stockbridges who contain a considerable portion of Negro blood. So some nice casual racism there. He's like the Stockbridges, they're bad. We like the Oneida so much more than we like the Stockbridge. But the Oneida are even better than not just the Stockbridge, but those black Stockbridge. We really don't like them. Which he doesn't say Dan by name, but it's clear like that's where he's referring to. Carl Miller, who was one of the leaders of the Stockbridge at the time, didn't like the Tousey family either. He said that they were a mixed African Indian family that was denied membership among the Stockbridges as far back as the 1820s. But then when the federal government came in, they put them on the rolls in 1856. The next guy came in and removed them in 1871. But
when you say the next guy, you're talking
the
about
next
native guy?
The next Indian agent.
Okay, the federal guy?
Yeah,
okay.
The federal guy. But then when the census was done in 1894, they put them back on the rolls again. And Miller, who's one of the tribal leaders, he goes, unfortunately, they're still with us today. He said, we've been trying to get rid of them for over 100 years, and they're still on the rolls. So, like, hated by the government, hated by the Stockbridge. Just Dan and his family are just not liked. By 1930, the federal government had basically given up, and Dan kind of just won this ongoing battle. I'm quoting here, the state of Wisconsin has recently passed what is known as the Severson Act, the purpose of which was in reality to renounce the national prohibition law. Since the passage of this act, we can expect very little cooperation from state and county officials in enforcing the 18th Amendment. It is impossible to improve law and order conditions on the reservation until this Stockbridge country can be thoroughly cleaned up of saloons and bootleggers. The Severson Act was a Wisconsin law that more or less told police don't work with the federal government on this.
On anything alcohol
related.
Okay.
Yeah. At this point, Wisconsin was like, we got to get out of prohibition somehow. And so they basically were like, if you see somebody making alcohol, just don't tell the federal agents. Just don't. So it didn't make it legal. It just made it so like it was no longer enforced by the local police. In March 1930, a judge found 22 people guilty of prohibition violations in the area of Morgan Siding. Of those, Dan Tousey received the biggest penalty, a $250 fine and 8 months in jail, which still isn't like huge.
Well, they got him in prison though.
Yeah.
Because wasn't there somebody that's like, I've been trying to get this guy locked up for years.
Yeah, he was identified as the owner of not just a place in Morgan Siding, but a bar in Gresham called the Black and White Wigwam. Which
great name.
That's a great name. He gets picked up again in 1938. This time prohibition is over, but the federal government finally nails him for selling liquor to Indians. The federal judge, Patrick Stone, sentenced Dan to 2 years in Leavenworth prison. So finally, some real, like, they got him this time.
Mm-hmm.
The judge said there needed to be better liquor control among the Indians and said, there have been 3 murders at the reservation, all attributable to liquor. And I don't know specifically what he's referring to there, but Stone felt it was too easy for 17 and 18-year-old Indian boys to get liquor, and these Indian boys do not have as much opportunity as the white race and need protection against this traffic. Tousey said that he was caught through entrapment, but the judge did not care. And here again, like, you hear the way the judge says it. I don't know. I'm going to take him at his word here. He's framing this as they're trying to protect the natives. That's why this law exists. I think that is what the intent is, but it doesn't read well to me.
Do you? Because I think I would question that heavily. It almost sounds to me like a lot of this law stuff is just they want the white man to have control of the alcohol.
I think that's true. I'm going to be generous, and I'm going to say I think that the intention was to try to help. The fact that they saw that the reservations had an incredible drinking problem, and they're like, we can help these guys improve themselves and become more successful in life if we just help them clean up a little bit.
And did you say that?
I think that is really the reason the law was passed. However, it does definitely have that side effect where now there's an easy excuse to send tons of natives to federal prison.
Mm-hmm.
Like, now it's like, oh, you sold a bottle of whiskey to your friend, you're going to Leavenworth. So yes, whether the intention was good or bad, the outcome definitely has some very bad parts to it.
And did you say that at this point in time, Indian reservations were known to have drinking problems? Because I know you said that like using the example of where the white man would give them a bunch of alcohol, get them hammered, and then make a really bad deal with them. It seems like this law would help the white man be able to do that because they would be completely reliant on the white man for alcohol.
That's a fair point. That's a very fair point.
But was there a point where they said like there's huge drinking problems on reservations that would suggest that, okay, we need to get rid of alcohol on reservations?
I don't have that in front of me, but that is my general understanding. Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know how much of that is true and how much of that is like a stereotype. So I want to be really careful about how I say it. But it definitely, there is the long-standing problem of drinking on reservations.
Right. And I know that is a huge stereotype. How true that stereotype is, I have no clue.
Yeah, I mean, there's entire books written about it. I've got a book on my work desk right now called like White Man's Wicked Water, and yeah, like there's entire books written about like how white people introducing alcohol to the natives like completely ravished them.
Okay, so they didn't even have alcohol prior to the white man.
No.
That I didn't even realize that.
No.
So
for whatever reason, they had not determined how to make alcohol at that point.
Interesting.
They had tobacco, but they did not have the alcohol. So no, like it wasn't part of the culture until it came in.
So I can see why it would become a problem.
Yeah.
Like.
So Dan Tousey finally gets caught, goes to Leavenworth prison. After he gets out, he actually lives a quiet life. He stays out of trouble, and he died on the reservation in 1950. Led by members of his family, his tavern was converted into a church.
Really?
Yeah. Which apparently it was sometimes a bar and sometimes a church, depending on the day of the week.
Okay.
Eventually, they raised enough money to build an actual church, but for a while, the bar was sometimes a bar and sometimes a church. When he died in 1950, it wasn't quite the end of the story, because his will would be contested the following year. He had left his estate to his housekeeper on the condition that after her death, whatever was remaining in his estate pass on to his heirs. Originally, the judge ruled that the heirs in this case would be 2 brothers, 2 sisters, 7 nieces and nephews. However, 2 illegitimate sons came forward to contest this decision, and it made its way up to Wisconsin Supreme Court. Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled that when Tousey left the estate to his heirs, he was aware that he had 2 illegitimate sons, and therefore he would know that they were his heirs. So the Supreme Court took the estate away from the brothers and sisters and gave it to the 2 illegitimate sons. So.
Oh, because everybody else, like, they were the most direct heirs?
Yes.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Because the rest of them were just uncles and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, they were like, no, he's actually got kids, and he knew he had kids, so it goes to them.
Interesting.
Yeah. Like, not this story, not like murder focused, even though there's some death in it.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to use Dan Tousey as an example of just like this whole thing here where there's different groups. Like, it's not like it's the federal government against the Stockbridge. It's the federal government against the Stockbridge and the Stockbridge against themselves sometimes. And Dan Tousey just disliked by everybody. But despite that disliked by everybody, he's still popular enough that he's got a hugely successful tavern.
Right.
So,
and now, when you were talking about it, so I understand that at the beginning somebody got killed, and then later on, I don't know, did Dan Tousey, when he hit the dude with the board,
that didn't kill him.
It
no.
just, but so there is some violence in there. But after that, it sounds like mostly just what they were going after was the fact that he was serving alcohol. Yeah. Or was there still
It had a reputation for being rowdy, but I mean, there was nothing that was like newsworthy that I could find. So
I mean, majority of this story is just them not liking this Native American or questioning whether it, you know, like whatever you want to call him, they did not like him and they were just trying to get rid of his bar because they didn't like him.
Right.
So,
but yeah, I got to say this is not as fleshed out as it could be, but I try to keep my notes to 4 pages or less. Because there's so much, like if you really want to get down in the weeds about all this, you could get really far down in the weeds. And I don't know that listeners want to spend like 3 hours listening to that. But yeah, just the whole play of politics, race and the law. I mean, there's so much actually going on here. But I thought Dan Tousey was a good case study of just kind of show some examples of some of the things that were done that, again, like, I could be very wrong, but I really, truly think that, like, there were people who were trying to do the right thing with the laws and maybe just didn't think it through or what.
Well, and you have to think, I mean, you also have to take the consideration that you're looking at it from what you know now.
Yeah.
And back then, let's just say that the people's perceptions of the natives were not nearly as, they really didn't, even if you were pro-native, you still didn't see natives as the equivalent of you, I would say.
It's true.
You know?
No, 100%, because I'll tell you this from looking at older newspapers. There's a lot of times in like the 1920s, 1930s, where the article will say, like, John Jones and an Oneida man did this. Mm-hmm. They won't even name the Oneida man. He's just like, he's just some guy.
Yeah, we don't care. He's not important.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, so like, it's only like in the last 100 years where natives were actually like fully people. and that might be overstating it, but they were just seeing like, oh yeah, that guy. Like,
yeah. And it is just shocking. The more stories we do like this, just to hear about just how awful we treated these people. Like, like it was completely uncalled for. There was no reason for it, and it was just like, wow, you know.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Like, it never goes well. So, like the census that I mentioned in the beginning, the 1894 census, that was done to determine who was Stockbridge. And the reasons that they wanted to determine that was as far as payments go, because they were going to be given parcels of land and things like that. So the reason to do it was to make sure people got paid, which sounds great.
It does.
But it has the unintended side effect that now the government is determining who is or isn't native.
Right.
And that's an ongoing problem. And even today, this is a conversation I have with a coworker. We've had this conversation numerous times now, where certain tribes, you know, they have what's called blood quantum. Okay. Where you have to be a certain percentage native to be native.
Okay.
And like, they didn't decide that. The government decided that. And again, like the reason was, to make sure that the right people were getting their payments and things like that. I don't know if the intention was a bad intention. I have no idea on that. But the outcome is not good.
Right.
Because what ends up with the outcome is now you have a situation where people, if they want to be a member of their own group, they can't really seek work elsewhere because if they want to get married and have kids, they have to get married and have kids with somebody from their own group, or otherwise their kid is going to get kicked off of the rolls.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're like 1/8 Native and you marry a white person, your kid is not going to be Native
anymore.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And it's like, why does the government get to decide that? You could be like, I'm Native, my kid should be Native, know? Like, so the reason that it was done originally, like there's a good reason it was done. But the outcomes always kind of have these really bad things that come with them.
And wouldn't you agree with me that no matter how they did this, they had to come up with a measure to say who's Native and who's not? And whatever measurement they would have came up with, when you look at it today, it would be like, that's really unfair. Because they could say anybody with any Native is Native.
Yeah.
But then people that are fully Native are going to get pissed off because the people that are like only a touch of Native get the same privileges.
And we just saw that the people who were more Stockbridge didn't like
the people
Dan because he was part black, even though he was clearly at least half Native.
Yeah. So I mean, in this scenario, no matter what they would have chosen, yeah, maybe what they chose wasn't the best solution, but there wasn't a good solution because no matter what they chose, they had to put a line in the sand. And whatever that line was, it was going to piss somebody off.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, that's just like now we've run into the situation now where you would think if you're going to tell a tribe, Indian nation, whatever terms you want to use, if you want to tell them that they can run their own government, they should get to choose who's a member of their group.
Right.
But they don't. They don't have a say in that.
And that's probably the way it should have been done, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like they should have given that privilege to the tribe itself.
Yeah.
Not where the government we're going to.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's a whole other thing. I won't get into all that. But the thing of it is like, yeah, these laws always have these really bad side effects. So even when the government's trying to be good, and a lot of times they were outright trying to be bad. I mean, let's not sugarcoat it. But even when they're trying to be good, there are some bad outcomes.
It doesn't go the way it should.
Yeah.
So well, that's another great episode of just about how poorly we treat the Native Americans. Or did treat the Native Americans. Hopefully we don't do it anymore. So
I feel like it's gotten better.
I would hope so. I would really, really hope so.
I mean, not that there aren't problems, because there sure are, but
So, but with that, do you got a sneak peek for anything coming up, or do you not know at this point where we're going from here?
I actually don't know.
Okay.
I probably have something, and if you asked me 2 weeks ago, I probably could have told you, but now I don't even remember.
So he's got to go home, look at his notes, and be like, oh yeah, that one's done. So.
I don't remember what I was working on anymore.
So we will leave the next episode then as a surprise. So,
yes.
So with that, we want to thank everybody for their continued support of this podcast. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Fox City's Murder and Mayhem. Join us in 2 weeks for another exciting episode of Murder and Mayhem.